Welcome everyone to the Fall 2025 El Palacio issue reading. I am very excited for all of these amazing contributors to be joining us, and they will each be reading a little bit from their work in the fall issue, and then we're going to allow plenty of time after that for a Q&A, which is often my favorite part of these events. I am the editor of El Palacio. I've been the editor for about 2 years. I wrote for El Palacio for about 8 years before I became editor. And I was raised in Las Vegas, New Mexico. So I'm very excited about this norteño panel here today. I'm also very excited to see two previous contributors to the magazine in the audience. Liana Torres wrote an amazing essay about attending a penitente ceremony. And then Desba, who is filming today, is actually a 2-time award winner for her article about the land exchange program that Fort Sill Tribe and Santa Ana Pueblo went through with the state. I just got back from a magazine conference, an international magazine conference, and Desba was awarded one of the 7 awards that El Palacio won, so I'm very excited about that. And these are all, these awards I'm winning are all from 2024, so I'm sure you'll be hearing about more award winners in the future for this year's issues. So El Palacio, for those of you who don't know, was founded in 1913. It's a very old magazine. And this issue is inadvertently the UNM, it's filled with UNM professors or UNM adjacent contributors. That was an accident, but it was a happy accident because this is an incredible issue. So we're going to start with the trio. So there's a trio here, Enrique, Levi, and Jose, who wrote an article about the small flour mills of northern New Mexico. Levi's going to start us off with a poem, but I'm going to just read all of their bios first so that Levi can read his poem, and then Enrique will be reading a little bit of the article. And then there will, as I said, be time for questions at the end. So Levi Romero is professor emeritus in the Chicana and Chicano Studies Department at UNM. He was selections on the New Mexico Homeland and other publications. José A. Rivera is Professor Emeritus of Community and Regional Planning at UNM. His research deals with comparative water institutions globally and mutual aid societies of the American Southwest. Among others, his publications include Acequia Culture, Water, Land, and Community in the Southwest, and the Zanjeras of Ilocos Norte Cooperative Irrigation Societies of the Philippines. Enrique R. Lamadrid is a distinguished professor emeritus of Spanish at UNM and editor of the prize-winning Querencias series at UNM Press. He is a commissioner of the Alamos de los Gallegos Acequia Association in Albuquerque's North Valley. In 2023, he co-edited Water for the People, Acequia Heritage of New Mexico in a Global Context with José A. Rivera. And before I invite Levi up here, I want to also mention that Page One Books is here selling books by all of the contributors to the fall issue, including contributors who are not featured on this panel today. And my colleague Greg is back here selling the fall issue of the magazine. You can also subscribe. Huge thank you to Page One, huge thank you to Fusion for hosting us today. It's exciting to be in this space. Okay, so Levi, would you like to come up?
Santas y buenas tardes, les de Dios. Buenas tardes simplemente, dice el diablo, por no mentar a Dios. Thank you, Emily and El Palacio, and all of you for being here this afternoon, joining us in this presentation. Thank you to my collaborators, Enrique and Jose. The repeating chorus line in the poem that I'm going to be doing is taken from a traditional canto or triando what we call el tril. It was sung at the molino in the village of Apodaca as crops such as corn, beans, chile, or wheat were laid out and sifted in sábanas, blankets, or sheets on the ground in the afternoon breeze to remove the dust and debris before threshing or milling. The canto was handed down to me by Aarón Griego. Aarón said that one person would stand at each end of the sábana and shake it while they sang the canto in unison, as the breeze blew the debris from the produce that was being prepared for milling. So I'd like to ask you all to join in when I'm singing the canto, just to ensure that it's not lost or forgotten, because it had not been sung in over 50 years when Aarón gave it to me. You may know his son, the well-known cantante flamenco singer Vicente Griego, and that's Aarón, his father. And he gave us to us both, and Vicente then uses it, I use it, but it'd been lost, and we were thankful that we're able to bring it back again. It's a canto, is just a verso, so actually there was more than just that one verse to the canto that they did. They do cantos also in Native American traditions, corn grinding songs, and the Dinés and the Pueblos, they have them too as well. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. La historia de un pueblo hecha polvo. ¿Qué pasó aquí? ¿Qué es esto? ¿En dónde está la sabiduría, granma, grampa? Ya no quedan ni miajas, ni tan siquiera una tortilla dura. El sonido esta tarde, una Harley retumbando por la plaza, y con eso se ponemos de quedar contentos. Sopla viento, sopla más, y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. Aquel molino en un tiempo con su rueda en el agua, ahora se usa de dispensa. Ay, hasta miedo me da arrimarme a este pueblo. Las lenguas como flechas apuntadas y venenosas. Somos hijos de tiempos antes pasados cuando se ayudaban al estilo mano a mano. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. ¿Qué pasó aquí? ¿Qué es esto? ¿Que no te conozco? ¿De qué familia eres? Pues yo y tu abuelo anduvimos juntos en Colorado, en La Borrega y en el Betabel, en Wyoming. Sí, nos conocemos bien, sin saber quién somos. Esta tarde, aquí, el maíz bailando seco en el viento y el pueblo sin molino. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa' todo el que vaya entrando. Sopla viento, sopla más y la paja volará. Hay preparado el banquete pa todo el que vaya entrando. Gracias.
After the Spanish introduced wheat to the Americas, molinitos, small gristmills, in New Mexico played a major role in the agricultural economy for centuries. Wheat, in its ground form as flour, was a staple during the Spanish colonial period of the fledgling province of New Mexico. Whole kernel wheat could spoil, so it was baked into bizcochos, hardtack that dried easily and kept for months. To process raw wheat, local mills became essential infrastructure along with the acequias that powered them. The pueblos welcomed wheat cultivation, and the staple grain became a part of their diet alongside corn. Many hundreds of loaves are baked for feast days in hornos, outdoor ovens, and to this day, traditional pueblo enchiladas are made with wheat tortillas, since corn tortillas came in a little bit later with nixtamal corn. So there'll be some questions on all these foodways later on, I'm hoping. And not enough can be said about how people feel about these molinitos. They're not the big industrial molinos that ground white flour for the U.S. Army in the Mora area. The big Cleveland mill, Jose tells me, this is not in the article, the big Cleveland roller mill that everybody loves so much, all the local people used it because it was so hard to keep using the grist mills. It was so much work. And so people know still where those molinitos were, los molinitos de la gente, and the old timers can tell you all about it. Some of them are still standing. Others, the only thing that's left is maybe the piedra de molino that the molinero would take home and maybe even be on his grave after the end. So it's really a very deep feeling with people, and of course, wheat, as other stable grains in the world, ends up being sacred. You know, the host for Mass is made of wheat. People do that all over the place. So it has that kind of depth that we need to appreciate. So.
Thank you both. And as I mentioned, the article was co-written by all three of them, including Jose, who will be a part of the Q&A section. So you will be hearing from him as well later. So the next article, and we're going in kind of roughly chronological order because these molinitos were built during the Spanish colonial period. And we're jumping way ahead to 1933 to 1935 to the Gallup Coal Wars. So David Correia is our featured writer for that. David Correia is a historical geographer who writes about New Mexico history, labor geography, and environmental politics. He is a professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at UNM and the author of 6 books, including Properties of Violence, Law, and Land Grant Struggle in Northern New Mexico. And I came to know, I think you pitched me this article, right? Because the photos in this article, you have to get the physical copy because the photos in this article had not been accessible previously until they were donated to the Palace, the Palace of Governors photo archive. So there's a ton more actually that we couldn't fit into this article. I tried to give him as many pages as I possibly could so we could feature them because they're incredible, but they were taken at the time that all of the dramatic events that David will be relaying some of went down. So I encourage you to pick up a copy and look at them because they're quite stunning. So.
Thank you, Emily. And I didn't know I was going to be part of an issue that included the articles that were in here. It was a treat to be a part of this issue. And the treat of this article, they really are the photos. I first came across these photos when I was writing my first book, Properties of Violence, and I tried to reach out to the copyright holder, and he told me it would be thousands of dollars per photo. I think one of the reasons this strike and the aftermath of the strike is so little known is because these photos, which are so dramatic and so remarkable, have really been hidden from people, but not anymore, thankfully. So it's a complicated story to tell because there was a strike in 1933 and then a dramatic aftermath and a series of events in 35. So with Emily's help, we sort of, I'm going to read the beginning of the piece that brings these two events together. But I'm starting in 35 and then working my way back to 33 in the piece. So the essay is called Strike and Struggle, the National Miners Union and the Great Gallup Coal War, 1933 to 1935. When violence erupted in early 1935, after the Gallup American Coal Company attempted to evict striking miners from its coal camps, Robert Miner, the famous union activist, raced to Gallup, New Mexico from New York to help. It would be his first and only trip to Gallup, and he would barely make it out alive. Miner hoped to lend his celebrity to the cause of the Gallup miners. In the early 20th century, he was the most popular and highest paid cartoonist in the country. His cartoons for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and New York World condemned imperial wars, lampooned wealthy industrialists, and celebrated working class struggles. On the eve of World War I, when his paper demanded he draw pro-war cartoons, he quit his job, declared himself a socialist, and joined the staff of The Masses and The Call, two of the most radical political magazines in the country. Miner's cartoons made him a major celebrity among left-wing political activists. When he went to Russia in 1918, Vladimir Lenin met him and told him he was a fan of his work. When Miner went to France to work on behalf of striking railway workers, he was jailed for treason and threatened with execution. When he returned to the US in 1920, he was known as Fighting Bob, a dyed-in-the-wool communist giving up art for politics. He joined the executive committee of the Communist Party of the United States of America and spent the next 2 decades organizing campaigns to free political prisoners and political activists. As director of the Communist Party's International Labor Defense, he helped defend Sacco and Vanzetti, the Italian anarchists accused of and later executed for robbery. He co-organized the defense of the Scottsboro Boys, the 9 black teenagers accused of rape by a white woman in Alabama. He was instrumental in starting ILD's magazine Labor Defender, which chronicled labor struggles across the country, particularly the campaigns of the National Miners Union. The communist-affiliated National Miners Union organized coal miners in Appalachia and the Intermountain West. When a series of NMU-organized strikes shut down coal mining in Utah and Colorado in the mid-1930s, Miner and the ILD helped organize relief supplies. The strike spread to New Mexico, where Governor Arthur Seligman declared martial law in Gallup in August of 1933. Miner sent lawyers to defend the Gallup strikers and their union organizers from harassment and arrest by troops. In the months after the strike was settled, the Gallup coal bosses slow-walked their promise to rehire coal miners in 1934. Miner condemned the coal mining companies and publicized the strikers' plight in the pages of Labor Defender. A month before Miner arrived in Gallup, sheriff's deputies had arrested 3 striking coal miners for resisting their eviction from the company camp, then hauled them into Gallup for a preliminary hearing. Hundreds of miners and their families protested the hearing, banging on the courthouse doors, prompting the judge to suspend the hearing. The sheriff and 3 deputies hauled their prisoners out of the courthouse's back door, but found themselves surrounded. They fired tear gas into the crowd. Shots rang out. When the smoke settled, the sheriff lay in a pool of his own blood, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Chaos erupted. McKinley County Undersheriff D. Roberts organized an official posse and dispatched it into Gallup. For the next 48 hours, hundreds of armed men roamed the town, searching homes and making arrests. Scores of miners were charged with capital murder of the sheriff. Dozens were deported. The killing of the sheriff made national news. When Miner, along with an ILD lawyer named David Levinson, showed up in Gallup on May 2nd, 1935, armed men, some masked, patrolled the town. Miner was in Gallup to interview witnesses and collect evidence in the defense of the dozens of people charged with capital murder. He and Levinson met with Julia Bartol, the wife of one of the jailed union leaders, at the El Navajo Hotel. Deciding it wasn't safe to discuss the case in the hotel lobby, they met instead in Bartol's car, which was parked in Gallup's Plaza. Just as they began to talk, masked men in 3 different cars surrounded them. Levinson stepped out of the car, put his hands in the air, and said he was a lawyer representing working men. "We don't want speeches," said a masked man just before pistol whipping Levinson. The last thing Miner remembered was being dragged from the car. When he came to, it was the middle of the night, 25 miles from Gallup, and he was lying on the side of the road, bleeding from the head. "Get out of Gallup," yelled a masked man as he sped away. "Get out and stay out." There's a picture of Miner and Levinson bleeding from the head, and that's why we led with that story. It was Emily's idea. The kidnapping of Miner and Levinson came at the tail end of one of the Great Depression's most dramatic labor struggles. For decades, the 2,000 coal miners who worked the Gallup coal fields had risked their lives to work more than 600 feet underground, digging hundreds of thousands of tons of coal each week. They came from all over the world. Most had been recruited in Mexico to work in the Gallup mines. Some had come from Eastern and Central Europe. Fewer than a dozen were U.S. citizens. The coal they dug fueled New Mexico's blast furnaces and copper smelters, powered the Santa Fe Railroad locomotives, generated electricity for every town west of Albuquerque, and was sold as far west as San Francisco. The miners were paid in company scrip, and their wages were based on the amount of coal a miner could dig, measured by rigged scales. By the early 1930s, most worked only a day or two a week and earned less than $20 a month, a wage reduced by deductions for the company doctor, rent in a company-owned camp, food and powder at a company-owned store, and electric mining lamps and fuel at marked up prices. If miners complained, the bosses docked their pay. When they tried to join a union, workers were blacklisted or deported. The United Mine Workers of America organized Gallup miners during the nationwide coal miners' strike of 1922 on the promise of better wages and working conditions. But when the UMW settled the strike in Kentucky and the Virginias, it ordered the Gallup miners back to work before they could gain union recognition for the coal companies, and they received no wage increases. Coal mining remained profitable in New Mexico during the Great Depression, but only because the mine operators reduced the workforce and slashed payroll by using skeleton crews. Half of all miners were unemployed and living on aid from the Depression-era Federal Emergency Relief Administration. In the summer of 1933, despite previous failures, desperate miners once again tried to organize a union. The National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933 granted workers the right to join independent unions for the first time in U.S. history and to bargain collectively with their bosses. Still distrustful of the United Mine Workers, the Gallup miners turned instead to the National Miners Union, which was created in 1928 by communists purged from the increasingly conservative United Mine Workers. The National Miners Union sent Martha and Bob Roberts to Gallup in August of 1933 to organize the miners. Both had just graduated from New York's famed Brookwood Labor College, a school novelist Sinclair Lewis called Labor's Harvard. Martha was just 21 years old and was already a seasoned organizer. There's great photos in the piece of Martha organizing in Gallup. Before coming to Gallup, she'd spent months organizing farm workers in New Mexico's Pecos Valley. Over the next 4 months in Gallup, she and Bob enrolled nearly 1,000 mine workers into the National Miners Union, created a women's auxiliary that picketed alongside the miners throughout the strike, and even organized the children of Gallup's miners, who spent the strike marching through the streets, demanding better wages and safer working conditions for their fathers. Martha became the face of the strike. She led members of the Women's Auxiliary to and from the picket lines each morning, gave rousing speeches on the plaza condemning the coal companies for refusing to negotiate, and confronted the police and the soldiers when they were sent to break up the strikers' marches. She was arrested by deputies for being a communist, beaten by troopers for insurrection, attacked by the United Mine Worker agitators who opposed the strike, and eventually, in late 1934, ejected from New Mexico by the governor. The struggle that began in the summer of 1933 lasted nearly 2 years and would become among the most dramatic labor struggles in U.S. history. Before it was over, martial law was declared and vigilantes patrolled Gallup's streets. Troops occupied Gallup for 6 months. Civil rights were suspended. A communist witch hunt seized the town. Hundreds of miners were arrested. Half a dozen were convicted on dubious charges. Scores were evicted from their homes. Dozens were deported. And a county sheriff was assassinated. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, David. As I keep telling people when I mention this article to them, this should be a TV series because it's quite dramatic. I'm also, as I edit historical pieces for the magazine from issue to issue, I'm also struck by the ways that history repeats itself. And reading David's article, I was like, oh, there's some of that going on now. Too. So I don't know if that's comforting or not, but certainly we've been in difficult places before in this state. The next contributor, the final contributor, is Petra Salazar. Petra Salazar is a poet, educator, and culture worker from the Española Valley in northern New Mexico. A former diesel mechanic turned community arts organizer, Salazar holds an MFA in poetry from UNC Greensboro and a Master's of Education from George Washington University. Her writing explores Coyote identity, ancestral memory, and sacred geographies of the U.S. Southwest. She moonlights as a creative reuse nonprofit where she works to make art sustainable and accessible. Her debut poetry collection, Harsh Terrain, is forthcoming from Flower Song Press. Salazar lives with her family in North Carolina, but her heart and her work remain rooted in the high desert of Aztlán. And I just want to add that having grown up in Las Vegas, and also I spent 8 years in Montana, and I spent the whole 8 years in Montana writing love letters to New Mexico. So I really appreciated Petra's essay because I really understood that longing. Welcome, Petra.
Thank you very much. So I grew up in northern New Mexico, just deeply attached to northern New Mexico. Everywhere I move or live, I just constantly feel a longing for New Mexico. And coming from New Mexico, Española especially, there's a lot of discrimination in our state, and really wanted to have a voice, I guess, express a more authentic experience of what it's like to grow up in northern New Mexico that doesn't sort of play into the stereotypes. So I'm going to start with the second section on page 31. Pilgrimage to Aztlán. The title of this is Aztlán, Lowrider Capital of the World. After my father, Joe Salazar, the Valley's beloved music teacher, died, I sold the house that we once shared and moved to North Carolina with my family for work. In the dislocation that followed, I worried I'd lost my footing in the world. Sorry, I had a migraine early and it gets me a little bit lost. But as time passes, I see that I'm not lost, not without a home. I can locate the desert bones of my ancestors on a map. I follow them like a homing beacon to the hearths of Primos and El Santuario de Chimayó to remember who I am. In the southeast, my identity often feels precarious, scrutinized, misread, or flattened into something it's not. My Spanglish sing-song is swallowed by a foreign twang, and I feel voiceless. To survive erasure, I carry home with me. Hanging from my rearview mirror is the name of my car, Espera, written in Old English script. She's a dusty, old Prius wagon, but I see a redemption arc in her gold paint, a mural, and dark-tinted windows. Visions like these sustain me, and it's only in New Mexico that I feel fully rooted. In the Spanish bull ring, querencia is the place where the bull takes its stand, draws its strength, and becomes almost impossible to kill. This is my querencia, too, a place where I reclaim my power. When I return home, my voice returns with me, melodic, boisterous, and complicated. Mine is a contested voice, but walking to Chimayó, I know I'm not alone. Many of my fellow pilgrims from this region carry the same ache. Damian Vegara Wilson described this as always having to explain ourselves, being mocked for our funny accents and targeted by degrading jokes. I still remember the sting of shame I felt in college at UNM when a classmate dismissed my accent as unintellectual. I didn't have the words for it then. I do now. Gloria Anzaldúa, writing from the Texas borderlands, called this kind of violence linguistic terrorism. I am my language, she writes. If you attack my language, you attack me. Her words give voice to what I had once mistaken for personal failure, shame that was never mine to carry. Anzaldúa reminds us that language is soul deep, so when it's silenced or erased, something ancestral is lost. This is what makes Vegara Wilson's work so all the more vital. His project, El Español de Nuevo México, is working to provide a public accessible archive documenting endangered varieties of New Mexican Spanish. This documentation is resistance, a way of remembering who we are and the lifeways that sustain us. When we lose our language, we don't just lose words, we lose the dichos, the remedios, the worldview and wisdom encoded in its grammar. We lose the grief rituals, the alabados, descansos, and pláticas that help us mourn and remember. On the road to Chimayó, I passed my family graves in Poaque. These are the graves I cleaned with my father each Memorial Day. We whispered to the dead, left offerings, swept stones. Other days we visited dying tios and primos down dusty roads where the best conversations happened, unguarded, honest, real. There I learned the warmth of presence in the space that Tomás Atencio called La Resolana, those sunny spots traditionally along the south wall of the building, where people have gathered across the years to talk about everyday life, about birth and about death. In New Mexico, grief is not peripheral. It is shared, sung, and built into the landscape. Even the law here protects roadside descansos. In other states, building them is illegal. This reverence points to a deeper worldview, one shaped by Latinx and indigenous traditions, where the sacred is inseparable from the land and still walks with us, mapping the way home. Our cultural relationship with grief is visible even in car culture. A West Side native whose family ran the Block Salazar mortuary for 56 years tells me death has been reflected in a whole different way here. We grieve and we remember. That's a strong part of our cultural heritage. For many, the lowrider becomes a vessel of memory, a living museum, he calls it. People who lost a brother, a loved one, have a mural of him painted on the hood of a lowrider. They say, I wanted to carry him with me. In this way, our devotion transcends churches and graveyards. Hospitality, shaped by Tewa lifeways, has long been sacred here. That ethic of care stretches beyond the pueblos into Indo-Hispano communities rooted in kinship and reciprocity. When I visited relatives this spring, I came away with a turquoise necklace, a woven bag, clothes, banana bread, apricot jam, and chili, like I'd been out shopping, not just catching up with family. One city official tells me that this spirit of generosity is both a gift and a challenge, part of why people experiencing homelessness find refuge in this valley, which still remembers how to care. It's the cholo helping the grandma load groceries at Center Market, he said. Devotion has always defined this valley. It's just very special. It's just something very unique about us being natives of the land. Devotion, rooted in land, family, and mutual aid, echoes across generations, shaping not only how we treat each other, but how we move through the world. Let's see. I'm going to move to the last section. Stay down. This Holy Week, walking from the Morada in Poaque to the Santuario, I felt spirit return to my body. I came seeking comfort in my sacred querencia, but as I moved through the tide of modernity, I learned that the sacred doesn't promise safety. It is la vida loca, a roiling power that demands reverence and courage, the same courage that it takes to hold on to hope in a collapsing world, the same courage that rides through the valley, embodied in the lowrider. The lowrider is a post-colonial Don Quixote, a cabezuda with a laid-back locura, riding forward on a trusty steed with a steady gaze and a holy foolishness, knowing we are tied to the earth. And if the earth is also tied to us, lassoed to our skinny necks, then let us ride together through our sacred shared fate, low and slow. Romero tells us about Anaya's writing process, tells a story about Anaya's writing process, this Levi Romero, which is a writing process which is distinctly New Mexican. Anaya described coming to the page a pura pala, a phrase that captures the grit and devotion behind his craft. It's the same kind of devotion you see when caretakers haul fresh dirt to refill the pocito at El Santuario, or when mayordomos clear the acequias each spring to let the water flow. This approach to labor isn't performative, it's rooted. Devotion is how we show up, how we stay down, in care work, in resistance, in passing forward what we love. Romero reminds us that in a world built to make us doubt our worth, the deepest act of devotion may be belief in our own sacred value, even when others can't see it. If no one else believes in us, he says, we have to believe in ourselves. Believing in oneself and empowering others to believe in themselves is one of the highest forms of resistance. I believe in Española, in its beauty, its contradictions, and the fierce creative power of our locura. That belief is what brings me here, to sit with you now in La Resolana, away from the fluorescent glare of the 24-hour workday, having carved out time a pura pala, to ask, to whom and to what do you devote your sacred attention and labor? Do your days serve your soul or your erasure?
Thank you, Petra, and I highly recommend everyone read all of these in full because they're all incredible. So I'm going to open this up to questions now. I'm going to try to get this out so I can bring it.
It's a quick question. But when you when you described El Palacio, I know I've read it, back to the early 19th century, 20th century. But you didn't say much about who owns it or who controls it now, or why it's still published today.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So it was founded in 1913 as a part of the Museum of New Mexico. It started as an archaeology pamphlet. I want to say it was a little bit more like an academic journal, but it was very small. It was very thin. And there were some archaeologists doing things that would not be done today. So it has come a long way. It is now the magazine of the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs, and it's supported by the Museum of New Mexico Foundation. So we cover the art, history, and culture of New Mexico. Any other questions for our readers, contributors?
Sure. I'll go second. Beautiful readings. Gracias a todos. As I'm listening, I'm curious to hear from each one of you what you see as the connection between these articles. I know for me, I was taking notes as I was listening, and I heard very much the first round as community, food, efficiency, and then in the second one, labor, work, violence, resistance, and the last, identity, longing. But I'm curious to hear what our panelists think about what connects these.
Well, I think that really what it is like a cornucopia, no? A cambalache of all these things that are connected and tied to the Tierra Sagrada de Nuevo Mexico. And I think it's like a jardín, no? Like a garden where you're all sharing the same space. We're sharing the same space, like a jardín is with different vegetables, where there's maíz or calabazas or chile or rabanitos. You have a cambalache here, a cornucopia of all those things coming out of the same Tierra Sagrada de Nuevo Mexico. And that's kind of how I feel, no? Different perspectives, different views, different experiences. Even though may have written about the same themes or some of these themes, I couldn't have written it in that way. And that's what's beautiful about it.
So amazing to hear from everybody this morning. The questions are great. Emily told us, keep it short. The questions are the most important part, right? So I begin by congratulating her for a new era, what I think is a new era for El Palacio. You know, just look at it. Just look at the spread. It used to be kind of connected to exhibits, which is fine. And I'm sure there's going to be an exhibit of these photos that David has found. It's amazing. I was just about 15, 20 years ago, I was recording corridos all over New Mexico, and I needed some mining corridos for a traveling Smithsonian exhibit. And so I knew about Gallup. I had friends from Gallup, and they had heard the corridos, but they just didn't want to share them. They didn't have them. They were there, but I never found any singers. Of course, Ludlow, the Ludlow massacre in 1914. There's amazing songs that have come out of that, as well as corridos, even though these are like international United Nations, these mining camps, right? So Ludlow in 1932, the explosion of the Morgan Jones mine. That one I found. The Mineshaft Tavern up in Madrid, as the miners who worked there called it, not Madrid. 16 miners were killed on December 7th, 1932, and people gave this to me. There was a network of survivors, because the owners of the mine would give you a free casket. They would give you, I don't know, not much of a settlement. The families, you know where they would move? To Martineztown. So someone gave this to me in Martineztown, because that was the refuge community for these mining families. And boy, those 16 miners that died, I was telling David, there's a verse for every one of them, be they from Poland or Oaxaca or just around the block. That corrido takes about 40 minutes to perform. I had to cut it quite a bit for the Smithsonian stuff. And of course, Empire Zinc, the Salt of the Earth Strike. And there's great corridos to that one too. So we're still looking for the Gallup ones, if anybody can help us, because this history has been so erased from the record. It's just astounding how thoroughly it's been erased. And these all these voices coming together, I'm moved. I'm shaken and I'm moved.
Thank you for the question. Great question. And I think you answered it yourself already in many ways. You found connections in those, brief comments that you made. But I'm glad you asked us to also find the connection across the articles that were presented today. And another way of looking at it is you read, those of you that will get a copy of El Palacio, they're available at the back of the room here. You'll see that Emily, our estimada, editor of this magazine, did a fantastic job of doing the same thing. She actually weaved together all of these three articles and pointed out, okay, here's the connection from this article and the other one and the other one. And amazingly, she has done this for every issue that I've read over probably the last 4 of them. It's been amazing how she's able to put together writers, contributors from arts, culture, history, and then be able to find connections that she puts into her, it's the opening page, her column, basically introducing each of these El Palacio issues. So thank you, Emily, for doing that. And speaking about the particular article that the three of us submitted, it was about a year ago when we first sent her a very rough draft of this article that we call Los Molinitos de la Gente, the small gristmills of the people. And we chose that as our title because, as Enrique alluded to earlier, there are large commercial industrial scale mills, especially along the Mora River, who had contracts with the Fort Union military and soldiers during the 1880 to about 1890 for about a 40-year period. Okay, but these now they're more durable because they're made out of a stone foundation and then adobes all the way to the top, a 3-story structure in most cases. Okay, the Cleveland Roller Mill, the St. Vrain Mill, made out of stone actually in that case, and then the La Cueva ranch, molino, also made out of adobes with a stone foundation. But these molinitos, if you look at the photograph that we have of them in this article, they're made out of natural materials, timber, logs from the forest. And in a few cases from adobes, but mostly made out of logs. So they would deteriorate with the snow and weather effects, and they would eventually need to be replaced, collapsed, and rebuilt, and so forth. But this went on. The first molinito, as we call it, and that's why we chose that word. They're very small. They look about the size of a cabin, and maybe even smaller, like a shed. And they have survived longer than the larger mills because they are protected at the Rancho de las Golondrinas. There's 3 of them there, along with a larger replica of one as well. So they have been protected by the Taos County Historical Society in the case of the Molino de los Duranes, and then by a family, the Gustavo Cordova family in Vadito near Peñasco. He has restored that family molino. So a few of them are still around. There's one at El Llanito near Bernalillo that we are interested in and maybe helping to get that one restored as well. They're all unique. As I gave a talk the other day at the Rancho de Golondrinas, they're all different. I never met a molino that I didn't like. And that's absolutely true. And that's true of what I say about acequias. When Emily read you the bio, she noted that I wrote a book about the acequia culture. And that's what I would tell my students. They're all different, topography changes them and so forth. But I never met an acequia that I didn't like. That's what I used to tell my students. But going back to your question, I was amazed, across the presentations here that Petra, for example, she hit upon the themes that some of us others have written about. She mentioned the word mutual aid, for example. Yes, I have written about the mutual aid societies of the American Southwest. She mentioned the acequias and the mayordomos, and yes, we have mentioned that, too. We have written about those. And of course, she mentioned and cited poetry by Levi Romero. So all of these were connected in many ways.
That's a good question. I guess I would say most so much of New Mexico's history is just the raw material for a tourist economy. It's a nostalgic, commercialized version of the past to serve a contemporary effort to sell something, to commodify the past into something that advances the interests of wealthy Santa Feans. All of the pieces in this refuse a nostalgic version of the past, and also all of the pieces in this try to understand the past on its own terms. I was really interested in, Emily mentioned it at the beginning, like the themes in the piece that I wrote seem to, I was writing about the present, really. I mean, I was like, I was in the archives and reading the stories and the events in 1933, 1935, people being deported, the truth being manipulated, justice being deferred, and I wanted to tell a story that reminded us that we've won those fights before and we can win them again. And I think what I appreciated about Petra's piece was that it requires like a real vigilance. There was a lot of vigilance in your piece, right? There has to, remembering the past is part of the struggle. It's part of the fight, and so I think that's what all of these pieces really attempted to do.
You'll have to bear with me. When I get migraines, it affects my language, my reading, so not as articulate as I usually am. But what I see is the connection of connecting around a common language, and it's a language that we don't often, that doesn't get a lot of attention, and I guess it's a worldview that I feel like reflects my experiences of my family and my culture. When I went to UNM, I got to participate in the Heritage Spanish program, and I feel like that was huge for me because otherwise there wasn't, growing up in Española, I got a lot of history from my family, fortunately, from my dad, José Salazar. He was born in 1925, so I feel very close to history, having heard his stories about just northern New Mexico experiences and important figures like Sabin Uribari. So when I got to UNM, I was pretty surprised by how much was missing just generally from the history, the education. When we were in secondary school, we missed so much about our own history, but it's, we hear it from our family, but it wasn't happening in schools. So I feel like what the articles in this issue, I feel like are keeping traditions alive. For instance, what Levi and you all wrote about now I'm seeing these stones everywhere. I keep sending them to Levi. I'm like, look, there's another one. Like, that's what that is. And I've seen them, in the santuario, there's the millstone right there when you walk into the santuario. Been going there my whole life, never knew what that was. But it's just like the way that the landscape becomes alive once you know these histories and the names of things. And it takes a lot of vigilance to hold on to and, to remember. We kind of have to resist pressures to forget and the whitewashing that happens and assimilation and our identity. These are things that we have to be proud of, and that there's a rich history that keeps us grounded. For me, it keeps me remembering who I am and what matters most, I guess. I was not very competitive in school. And when I went to UNM, it was just like, oh, you have to know this, you have to do this. It was just like all these things that everyone kept saying, this is what's so important. And all that stuff I learned from my family kept getting pushed aside as, irrelevant almost. And so it's important to me to teach my son and to just keep doing the work. And I wish I didn't have a brain issue going on right now, but thank you.
I also want to add, I just spotted another contributor to the fall issue, Daisy Atterbury. If you can wave. Daisy wrote about nuclear colonialism in New Mexico. There's also a profile of them in the issue, and their book is back there as well for sale. I'm hard-pressed to describe the work. It's poetic nonfiction, lyric nonfiction. It's a genre bending. And it's about nuclear colonialism, space travel, gender, all kinds of things. So much in there. So lots of New Mexican history sprinkled in there. And so partially to answer your question, I did write in my letter from the editor that one of the threads I see moving through this is this idea of labor and the body. And how, even in Petra's essay, she writes about these lowriders that take a lot of work. So there's a lot of work that kind of threads through, some for creative purposes like the lowriders, and some for, environmental destruction like the nuclear stuff. So, so yeah, that's one of the threads for sure. Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one or two more.
It's a question for Jose. I was recently at the mill over in St. Vrain Mill in Mora, and it's crumbling. Is anybody working on that?
Which one, in Rainsville?
No, in Mora.
The St. Vrain? Yes, there is a restoration project going on right now. They're still raising money for it. It was abandoned and left to the walls were cracking on the side, and they've reinforced them by now and pouring some side foundation to hold up, because the highway from Mora to Angel Fire goes right next to that mill, so it receives a lot of traffic for centuries, so now, or decades anyway. And now there's a restoration going on. And by the way, there's an annual conference of the New Mexico Historic Preservation Division going to be held at the Highlands University campus this coming weekend. It starts on Friday and goes Saturday and Sunday. And there'll be a presentation by the St. Vrain Mill Foundation that is behind raising money and restoring that mill. But it's we call it the Molino de Piedra, because unlike most other mills made out of adobe, the large ones, and then logs for the small ones, molinitos as we call them, the St. Vrain is milled out of stone. There is one other stone molino. If those of you that travel to Cimarron, there's another stone-built mill there. Now that one has been totally preserved, and in fact, it's now a historical museum in Cimarron. So yes, that one's in process of the St. Vrain is in process of being restored.
Oh, remember next weekend also is Golondrinas, if you want to see any of these things in motion. And I think some of the volunteers up there even make bizcochitos with this wheat that's coming out. So check it out. There's spin-off articles that are undoubtedly going to come out of this. The St. Vrain Mill, that white flour, Fort Union, the last campaign against the Cheyenne, the last campaign against the Arapaho, the last campaign against the Comanches, the last one against the Navajos, the last one against the Apaches. Fort Union. Don't forget. But Cleveland escaped that bullet thanks to. And I was putting that in, and Jose said, "No, let's focus on the Molinos." And I said, "The context." And Emily says, "Well, maybe that's another article, because there's other stuff in there like Oñate." I left that paragraph out. Well, he was the first on the scene, but he was a miner, and he didn't really care about agriculture except to eat. And we got to remember the Tlaxcaltecas that came in. They ended up being the teachers at all of the missions, and they said, we are the people of the corn, just like you, but wait till you try this wheat. And Pueblo people just love the wheat. You plant your grass and keep harvesting it year after year after year. Sorry.
Yeah, he mentioned the Ranchos Golondrinas. that's a great way to quickly learn about these small grist mills, flour mills, okay? Because they have preserved 3 of them. One that was relocated from Truchas, and that's the one that still operates during the Harvest Festival and make it work during that one event. Then there's one from Talpa, El Molino Viejo, it's called the Talpa. It's featured right there on the grounds of Ranchas Golondrinas. And then they rebuilt one on the original. Golondrinas had a molino of itself at one time, and rebuilt the replica of it there. So it's a fantastic way to get to know. There's also a replica of one molino from the Rociada Sapeo area. Now that one is just a replica, but it's a commercial scale. And so to their credit, the Ranchas Golondrinas have taken upon itself to preserve these mills, because there's only about 7 of these small mills still standing that we know about. We're trying to find out where some others are. We think there are others, and they probably do need restoration. And then of the commercial ones, there's also only about 7 of them still standing. Okay, so Ranchas Golondrinas for sure is a place to go.
Thank you. I think we need to wrap up, but there are issues for sale back here, books for sale. If the contributors are willing to stick around and sign books, maybe that's something that can happen. I just want to mention also, there's a couple of ways that you can subscribe. So you can subscribe directly at elpalacio.org, or you can, if you live in Santa Fe, this is more of a benefit for if you live in Santa Fe, but if you join the Museum Foundation, receiving the magazine is a part of that benefit. But you can also subscribe directly. We also have a podcast called Encounter Culture. So a lot of the New Mexican history that's in these pages is also, there's different histories in audio form on the podcast called Encounter Culture. And huge thank you to Fusion, huge thank you to Page One Books, and thank you all for coming. Huge thank you to Desba for filming this, and thank you to all the contributors for making it an excellent issue.